Holy crap. Pick a fight about that a little bit, why don't you? Why is everybody fighting me on this? Just trying to get on. Shouldn't this hard? I don't know why everything's being this difficult tonight. All right. Yeah, why are you freaking out? Anyway. I'm super enthusiastic to get on here, but apparently it doesn't want me to do that. Yeah, so last night, I'm not even sure what to call it. Maybe we'll do that tonight. We'll see. Start right off the bat. What are we going to call this series that we were working on last night? Raven puns. What do we call that? What do we call the series? Would we just call it Corvids? I mean, I don't know. Like the inclination is like to play off of the murder of crows. I mean, we could do that, honestly. Let's make sure that ravens. Raven. There's no consistent distinction between crows and raven. These appellations have been assigned to different species chiefly on the basis of their size, crows generally being smaller than ravens. Collective nouns for a group of ravens, or at least the common raven, include unkindness, treachery, and conspiracy. So, conspiracy of ravens? Really? Conspiracy or treachery? Could we use that? Or an unkindness? What is the collective term for a group of ravens? The collective noun is an unkindness. An unkindness of ravens. That's a jerk move, honestly. Conspiracy of ravens. So they don't have a collective term for it. As an author, Chloe Rhodes explained in An Unkindness of Raven, a book of collective nouns, unlike proverbs, rhymes, or homilies, many of these words endure because they were recorded and published in books of courtesy handbooks designed to educate the nobility. They were created and perpetuated as a means of marking out the aristocracy from the less well-bred masses. So it's an unkindness of ravens, a conspiracy of ravens. Yeah, I mean, there's not a consensus. Oh, okay. So it looks like there might even be an equivalent in crows too. So crows have murder, congress, horde, muster, and cauldron. And ravens, what are they using for ravens? Ravens are murder, congress, horde, and unkindness. I don't like this level of uncertainty. Okay, so this one seems to say it's not a murder of crows. No, it's not actually a murder of crows. Okay, technically it is, but we should still abandon absurd and antiquated terms of venery. You've heard of them all before, somewhere, in a bad poem. Did you know that a group of owls is called a parliament? Did you know that a group of jellyfish is called a smack? Did you know that the group of Indonesian mountain weasels is called a bubblegum? I made that last one up. Okay, so I dig it. But they've always left me feeling annoyed. Annoyed because as a lifelong birder, I've never once used parliament for owls or murder for crows or anything of that sort, or heard anyone else use them. A group of birds, any bird, is a flock. A group of cows is a herd. Other than that, I just don't see enough groups of other animals to need more words. Have you ever referred to a group of vultures as a venue? Come on. Do you have any new data? No, it doesn't look like it. So it doesn't look like there's like a hardcore use or requirement of. So collective nouns, conspiracy. What the hell? Like every source I look up offers a new word for a group of ravens. This one says conspiracy of ravens, yes. Unkindness of ravens, yes. Storytelling of ravens. There's no consistent distinction between crows and ravens, and their appellations have been assigned to different species chiefly on the basis of their size, crows generally being smaller than ravens. Why would collective nouns for ravens? I really want a good answer for this. Because conspiracy, congress, and unkindness seem to show up. Storytelling of ravens. What the hell is that? Oh, for pity's sake. In order to run a successful website, we are certain that partners with setting cookies. I don't want to deal with your crap. Stop with the pop-ups. Canadian geese. If you come upon geese, no, I don't care. Eagles. Okay, so what do we got here? We've got the raven, which is a territorial bird of the Yukon, also has a few interesting collective nouns associated with it. A murder of ravens is the collective noun listed in the Book of St. Albans, which is where most of that comes from. This collective noun is more often associated with crows. Crows and ravens, although similar in appearance, are very different. According to the question answering website Quora, there is a folktale that crows will gather and decide the capital fate of another crow. This is based on the alleged behavior of crows, killing a crow that is sick or does not belong to the group. That's not how they do it, though. Other collective nouns for ravens include a conspiracy, a congress, an unkindness, and there is apparently also storytelling of ravens. So I guess we're going to play with that. So let's pull them up, and maybe these could be the names of different volumes of the series. So, a conspiracy, a unkindness, a, what was it, storytelling, and a murder. So these could all be subtitles for, I don't see a lot of the discussion of Congress, but we'll look it up. Conspiracy, storytelling, and kindness. Conspiracy seems to be the most common one, a conspiracy of ravens. So I do feel like looking up the collective noun for ravens, let's see, young, oh, generic terms. Generic terms. Okay, so we have young. Okay, the terms in this table apply to many of all taxa, in particular biological families, classes, and clades. Okay, so let's do crow. Like crow has a pretty commonly known to be murder, but and that fits. That fits with the overall theme of being a detective organization, or a group of detectives for the main characters. But the main characters, I want them to be ravens. So what do we got here? So we pull back here, PR, raven. And unkindness is very common. A conspiracy and unkindness are the two most common. So, okay, going forward, we're probably going to do we could probably start the first volume of the character stories with calling it an unkindness. I think that would probably work. So what I've been doing in the meantime is I figured out more of the details of where we were going with this last night. So we started with the idea of a scientist experimenting with crashed UFO technology, develops a teleportation device of some kind, and sort of tests it on corvids of some kind. So I went with ravens, and inadvertently does a version of the fly where she contaminates their DNA with her own DNA. And so you have these humanoid crows. But here's what I actually played across with yesterday was I had talked about doing 3 of them. So doing 3 crows based off of the Morrigan and Mab off the Celtic mythology. And one of the things that I knew that they usually do sets of 3 in Celtic mythology, and it turns out that the Morrigan is a term that could be used collectively to refer to a triple goddess or 3 sisters. And 3 sisters, the daughters of Ernmas, are oftentimes called Morrigan, Babd, and Macha. Sometimes the trinity consists of Babd, Macha, and Anand, collectively known as the Morrigan. Occasionally, Nemain or Fae appear in the various combinations. So we have some potential names for the concept that the evil organization will see them as the Morrigan, the triple raven character. But we also have Hugin and Munin, which are the 2 ravens belonging to Odin that theoretically could belong to that organization of nefarious intent that they oppose, and they will refer to the crows as the 3 sisters as the Morrigna. There we go. I'm saying it wrong. Morrigna. So we can have 3 raven sisters, and I was playing around with this idea a little bit, and I got to thinking, like, maybe we set it up so that they disguise their numbers. So everybody who has an encounter with them thinks there's only 1 of them, but there are 3 of them. And so everybody thinks they're all the same one. And I got to thinking, like, all right, so if they ever have to sign their name or leave a mark, what could they leave? And then I got thinking, like, if they all had their names start with the same letter, it's like Lana Lang and Lex Luthor and Lois Lane. It's having that sort of alliteration kind of concept. So if each of them started with the same letter, and so I started to do some research, and one of the tricks is, because this is marginally inspired, but, well, I mean, the foundations of it were inspired by the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The inclination is to say, like, okay, so what kind of Renaissance names can we use for 3 female characters? And turns out that's not a common thing to have to deal with. And so I'm like, okay, so what kind of names for characters like Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo are all very iconic historical names that are unique enough that you don't usually encounter them very often. So I was like, well, how about we look up names of famous female scientists? And there's a lot of them are in there. A lot of the scientists are astronomers. A lot of well-known female scientists are astronomers or doctors. And I'm like, that's a weird convergence of a lot of that. But I also get that to a certain degree, a lot of women in that time would not have been accepted in other fields. Medicine was caring for people, and astronomy was just looking through a telescope. So it didn't feel as threatening for somebody else to be able to do those kinds of things. So I was debating about it and like, there's a part of me is like, Ada Lovelace is a possible choice. Amelia Earhart is one of the classic, like, adventurous female characters. And so I was like, well, who else do I do with that? And my goal was to give them all the same first letter. And like, there are a few Alice's or something like that, but nobody, like, I would say was super noteworthy. And so I was just kind of like, it didn't feel quite right. And then I was doing a search on other women of note through history. And so from that list, we got Maria Sibylla Marianne, and she's a German who studied insects and wrote the definitive book for a lot of people on the life stages and cycles of insects. And she did illustrations of each of the stages of development for each of the insects that she studied. So this idea of doing a series of illustrations and studying insects and life and mutation and change seemed like an interesting, idea. So it kind of like Maria as one of them. And here's the thing, like all of these names, it's really weird, but we had people named Leonardo and Michelangelo throughout history in the early pages of history, but we don't really have that as much now. But almost all throughout history, the names for women have not changed very much. Like, you're going to find Marys and Margarets and Alice and Anne, and like they're just the standard name that women have had throughout history. And it's so weird that that's the way that goes. So Maria, and then I have to admit, one of them is sort of like I kind of have to do it, is Dr. Mae Jemison. She is a doctor, like a medical doctor. She is a engineer. I forget what her engineering was in, but she's also an astronaut and a children's book writer and an activist. And I'm like, wow, I mean, this is a polymath. This is a Michelangelo, if there or a Leonardo, if there ever was one. And so I'm like, yeah, I definitely, she deserves to have, like that deserves to be a name to see as an inspiring name to attach to a character. So like the scientist character who starts out in the story, that would be a name she would know and see as a role model or an inspiration to use to name her children. But here's another one that I happened across trying to find some interesting stuff. I was like, what about female detectives? And I was like, you get a lot of fictional detectives, and most of them are coming from the 1930s and on. I don't really want to do fictional characters. I wanted real people, but I came across a list of 3 of them. One of them happens to start with an M. So we have Maria and May, M-A-E, as the 2 that we've already had. And I found Maud West was a mistress of disguise, a private investigator, and a very successful detective. And I'm like, oh yeah, that is definitely going in the list. Maud is a good name. It pairs well with May and Maria for starting with an M. I'm like, yep, okay, so they're all M's. And it so happens that the M works well with the Morigna, the triplet goddesses of ravens in Celtic mythology. And even beyond that, you have the triplet goddess is often referred to as the 3 sisters, or Morrigan, Matcha. They don't have the 3rd one starting with an M, but we can work with it. So there's a lot of M's going on here, is what I'm saying. But so now we have the idea of a triple Raven detective agency. And we have we can give this the scientist that starts it all off as a sort of a standard, just a standard female name. It's sort of like April O'Neil on the Turtles was just a standard name they came up with, I guess. And we have the idea that the organization they're confronting is using mysticism or magic as a theme. I'm trying to be careful here because one of the tricks to this is, like, if I treat it like this is an organization that does crimes and shenanigans using fake magic or ghosts or spirits or that kind of thing, like, you start to run into Scooby-Doo territory, which is not where we want to go. It's not like unmasking old man Jenkins, reveal that he's been, like, I don't want to necessarily do that. Although it could be kind of fun to play on that a little bit. So we have this detective group, and I was really thinking about, like, how I would model them as detectives. And I like the idea of taking that notion of the engineer, doctor, scientist, the artist, the illustrator of the trio, and then the mistress of disguise and costuming and stuff. I sort of like having those be secondary characteristics of the characters and give them personality. But also, looking at that last night and thinking about it, what kind of detectives are we aiming for? And I feel like the ones that spring most to my mind are, there's the Sherlock Holmes, and then there's sort of a, if you've seen the TV series, I believe it's Psych, where a guy pretends to be a psychic, and he just uses memory tricks and whatnot to memorize certain pieces of information that help them crack the mystery at the end. And then there's Adrian Monk, whose obsessive compulsive tendency to sort things is what allows him to notice key pieces of information. So there's a part of me that says, like, modeling each of them as having a certain set of talents based off of that, and then having them be engineers and gadget workers too. I think that sort of starts to flesh out the characters fairly well. I haven't decided which name gets which traits, but I like the idea of having sort of like their own personalities and skills that they bring to the table. And then I do like what we did here at the beginning was looking up the collective noun for ravens. So it would be a conspiracy, unkindness, murder, and storytelling. And I feel like it's harder to get storytelling to work as the title for a run of stories, just because nobody calls their recipe my new food. Like, this is my recipe for making food. No, like, that's what it is, but you can't call your cookie recipe food. This is my food cookie. They're like, it just doesn't know. So having a set of stories called a storytelling of any kind doesn't work as well. But conspiracy, unkindness, and murder all work really well for the theme of detectives and spies. And so this works really well. I'd have to play around with the specific title, and I think that would be based off of what stories I tell in the first story with it. But I do think it's all coming together relatively well. I'm not sure really what the goal of the evil organization that they're opposing would be, other than just, you know, control of certain things in the city or something like that. Like they want to be the influential. Like I think I have to look up things along the lines of Irish mob or other sort of maybe not specifically just Irish, because if they're going to be using concepts like Odin, although Odin could just be one of the scientists of, well, yeah, no, it's still, that's not Celtic, that's something else. So would I be using a Norse themed organization? I don't know. That's a distinctly weird, well, that's a very weird one to make an approach for. And I was debating about how Hugin and Munin would come into being. I'm debating whether or not they're more like the harpy scientists than they are the Raven sisters. And I guess I can call them that. Raven sisters. That's fair. So Raven sisters. So I think we've got a lot of the chunks there dealt with. And at this point, it really comes down to like brainstorming up a story arc for the characters and brainstorming up the conspiracy that they're fighting. And so that, like, the first volume can be an unkindness, or maybe the first one is a murder. The second one is an unkindness, and the third one would be the conspiracy. And maybe make a fourth one that's a collection of short stories with the characters and call it the storytelling of Ravens. But so we could do. Okay, so let's do that. Let's put them in that order. And then figure out where we go from there. And some of that's just going to be disassembling the classic detective stories and finding a template of a story that would work well for telling in this format. And then I think that's most of where I'd flesh that out tonight. I mean, it's been a lot of fun doing the research and figuring this out for such an idea that just hit in the middle of last night out of nowhere. And it was based off of my stating, like, yeah, what would be really hard to do is come up with an original story setting that you start from the idea of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and go from there. And yep, that's how we did that. That happened. So with that in mind, I think it might be fun to continue doing that this week. So what other sort of storage settings or character styles could we play with? And like something that would be like, it's so distinctly it that you couldn't do something else like it. And then let's figure out a way to do it anyway. So, all right. So along the lines of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'm going to dig into my own childhood here and see if I can remember some of my favorite things. So we had things like G.I. Joe, He-Man. I want to say like Ghostbusters, actually. So let's do 80s classic movies and see what we get. Movies is not a movies. Oh, E.T. That would be interesting. Goonies. Goonies would be too easy, I think, to do a new version on. It's a kid's adventure, and like treasure adventure. So Ghostbusters is a good contender. Stand By Me is just a coming of age story. Gremlins. Okay. Nightmare on Elm Street. Oh, that feels okay. So let's start keeping some of the tabs on some of that. So Ghostbusters, Gremlins. I think I had something a few years ago for Gremlins. If I remember correctly, the main character was a gremlin who got kicked out of her community because she was better at fixing things than breaking things. So, I mean, it feels sort of like I've already touched on that a little bit, and it feels dishonest to try to play with it for something new, but maybe. Okay, Terminator. Ooh, Beetlejuice. Weird Science. Okay, some of these could be totally weird to play with. Weird Science. Okay, and what else we got? Caddyshack, Heathers, no. Raging Bull. Nightmare on Elm Street, meh. Risky Business, Poltergeist, Aliens, Star Wars movies, The Evil Dead, The Shining, American Werewolf in London, Blade Runner, okay, so let's do American Werewolf in London and Blade Runner and what else we got? What else we got? Bill and Ted. Oh yeah, Bill and Ted is a classic. Die Hard, Poltergeist. Okay, so let's put some of those in. And we'll just play with these tomorrow, I think. A little bit more tomorrow, but I might do a little bit tonight too. Geist. Die Hard. Bill and Ted. That's definitely something we're going to play with at some point, because that's a classic. That's an 80s memory and a half. All right, so some of these I don't remember. Roger Rabbit. Oh, that's I didn't mean to spit there. Wow, Roger Rabbit. Now that's a hardcore specific. Like that's when you do that. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. There was the comic for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and then there was the movie, and the movie was a really horrible bastardization of the comic, from what I hear. I got to write Roger Rabbit in, because that is a definite to play with. So we'll put League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in. I do like the steampunk theme. Extraordinary Gentlemen. And let's see what else we got. Was that an 80s? The Thing. Huh. All right. So TV. I was like, let's try 80s classic TV. See what else we got. Cheers, Golden Girls, Alf. Alf would be fun. Alf and E.T. pair well together. Alf, E.T. I should probably use that as caps because I'm going to look back at that later and go, what does he mean by Alphabet? That's not an actual word. So what have we got there? Okay, so Alf, A-Team. There you go. I don't know if that's distinct enough. Family Ties, Wonder Years, Happy Days, Dukes of Hazzard. Dukes of Hazzard. There's enough story in Dukes of Hazzard. It's just a couple of country boys with a General Lee vehicle, which is problematic nowadays. Knight Rider. Knight Rider. Perfect Strangers is also in there, and that one I was like, I can kind of see that. I don't know what I'd do with it yet. Facts of Life, MASH, Fantasy Island. Oh yeah, Fantasy Island, absolutely. That's going on the list. Island. All right, so why is that an M? There's no M in Island. Full House, Married with Children, Taxi, Jeffersons, Roseanne, Night Court. I do remember Night Court. Saved by the Bell, Seinfeld, The Greatest American Hero. Oh, in MacGyver. There you go. Greatest American Hero. MacGyver. I don't know how to spell that. I vaguely remember some of that. Like, I remember MacGyver being cool. I enjoyed it. But, like, how is he just, like, how is his existence just going around solving problems by sticking things together that don't belong together? How is that his job? Charlie's Angels. I don't know that I want to do anything with Charlie's Angels. I think that's kind of lame, but Cagney and Lacey. Hill Street Blues, Silver Spoons, Quantum Leap. There you go. That's a weird little distinctive setting to play with. Quantum Leap. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind with something like Quantum Leap is you're going to change it from time travel to reality travel. I don't know that works as well as I think it does. But Family Matters, Doogie Howser, Hawaii Five-0, St. Elsewhere, Punky Brewster, Fraggle Rock. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what I would do with that, but let's have ourselves a look. Fraggle Rock. Let's pop that into the list too. So what do we got now? I was going to say He-Man and G.I. Joe 2. So that's a pretty substantial list. So let's take a look through. We've got Ghostbusters, Gremlins, Beetlejuice. I could kind of say Blade Runner. In that same, I'm just sort of, at this point, I'm sort of clumping them by ones I feel like most iconic. Oh, Roger Rabbit, I definitely want to play with, I think. So, Bill and Ted. Oh, that's hard to make that pick. Fantasy Island could be fun too. Greatest American Hero is one you don't hear about a lot anymore. But I do feel like that borders a little too closely to what we just did. Because if I remember correctly, Greatest American Hero was a guy who happens to find a costume that grants him superhero powers as long as he's wearing it, but it's like a universal remote that you don't have the instructions on how to use, and it's written in a language you can't read. So his costume does things that could be heroic and save the world, but he's completely incompetent on how to use it. So that could be fun to play with. I don't know what I'd do for MacGyver. I'm a little vague on what I'd do with Quantum Leap. I mean, that was all done with a scientist who jumped to other people's bodies in the past and set right what went wrong, kind of thing. So how would I approach that now, doing something different? Well, like the usual prompting for things like that would be just to reverse everything. So instead of science, you use magic. Instead of a male character, you use a female character. Instead of the past, you do the future. Or instead of time travel, you do space travel. That could be a weird one to try to do. Like, instead of jumping into people at different times, you jump into beings on other worlds. But it's a little bit harder to do that because the point of Quantum Leap was really to show events in history as certain important events in history from the perspective of somebody from the present time, learning their importance and how things could have gone very differently if certain circumstances hadn't happened the way they're supposed to happen. And so, like, that's a little harder to do because if you're not jumping through time, there's not a consequence that our world won't be the way it's supposed to be if somebody on Alpha Centauri didn't do something that day. Like, yeah, it doesn't work quite the same way, so I'd have to figure that out a little bit. But all right, so I do think that's something to play with. Greatest American Hero. I don't know what I would do with Fraggle Rock, but it is a fun memory of mine from my childhood. So my inclination is to include it. Fantasy Island, Knight Rider. I mean, it's just a souped-up, special, self-aware car. So you could play with it and you could do something with it, but I don't know that it speaks to me on the same level. Okay, so we've got these three. Pull those out. Alf and E.T. are, they're just their thing. I'm going to chunk. Ghostbusters is high on my list. I want that to be kind of high up there. Bill and Ted and Roger Rabbit. So Roger Rabbit. Die Hard is something you could do too, but that's just, I mean, that's not super hard to find examples of that kind of thing going on. Like, that's just an ordinary guy caught in a circumstance where he has to become a hero. That's literally what Die Hard is. That exists already. It doesn't really need a reboot. Not that what we're doing is rebooting any of these. We're just using these as foundations for going into inspiring new works. Okay, so Roger Rabbit, Ghostbusters, Bill and Ted, Fantasy Island, Greatest American Hero, and Quantum Leap, Gremlins, Beetlejuice, and then we start to just get into the general, like, fond memory category. But since you suggested League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, let's play with that for the rest of tonight. That seems fair. You proposed it. Let's play with it. I want this to be an interactive channel of people discussing things that they think are interesting. So League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Let's pull some info up about that. The League of, well, League of Legends comes up right away. That's not what I'm going for, but what is League? Well, let's not be too hasty. League of Legends is a multiplayer online battle arena video game developed and published by Riot Games. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. That is established as, this sounds like, and I think I've seen stuff for League of Legends. I know I sound like I'm deviating from the course, but I've seen stuff about League of Legends that makes it very similar to what a lot of people do for Overwatch. So the game follows a freemium model. Okay, what else we got? The goal is usually to destroy the opposing team's nexus. Okay, so it's really just a capture the flag game. But the thing I notice, I've seen people reacting to cinematics based off of the game for certain characters. And characters are unique, special ability, sort of superhero-y kind of characters. So it's got some similarity to Overwatch. In all game modes, players control characters called champions, chosen or assigned every match, who each have a set of unique abilities. Champions begin every match at a low level and then gain experience over the course of the match to achieve a maximum level of 18. Gaining champion levels in matches allows players to unlock their champion's special abilities. I'm not super worried about that right now. Okay, so we've got that basic idea of capture the flag with special powered superheroes from League of Legends, which is what the first prompt that came up in Google when I did a search was. So let's go back to League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, if my memory serves me correctly, the premise to start with was the same for both the comic and the movie. Were you more interested in the movie? Okay, so the movie is the one you're most familiar with. So League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was a graphic novel series. It was written by Alan Moore. The series spans 4 volumes, an original graphic novel, and a spin-off trilogy of graphic novellas. And the graphic novel Black Dossier were published. According to Moore, the concept behind the series was initially a Justice League of Victorian England, but he quickly developed it as an opportunity to merge elements from many works of fiction into one. So that's my memory of it. Is it's really sort of like a Jules Verne and that sort of thing, collection of characters from early genre fiction. And let's see. The year is 1898, so Minamura is recruited by Campion Bond on behalf of British intelligence to assemble a league of extraordinary individuals to protect the interests of the Empire. Captain Nemo, Alan Quatermain, Dr. Jekyll, the Invisible Man. They help stop a gang war between Fu Manchu and Professor Hardy. So really, it's just delving into the classic literary pulp characters. Now, steampunk does have a certain appeal to it. But I also feel like there's a sort of appeal for diesel punk and Art Deco style for me. And I'm feeling like there's a place in there that if you get too close to a certain thing, you end up with a sort of a mishmash with Warehouse 13, I believe it is. Warehouse 13 was actually one of my favorite TV series for a while. But so let's play with steampunk. So if we take the idea of a League of Legends, Overwatch in steampunk with literary classic monster fiction. So perhaps let's take a look at what they got for the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen characters here. We have Wilhelmina Murray, who I believe she was one of the victims of Dracula. Alan Quatermain, King Solomon's Mine main character. Okay. Prince Dakar is a fictional character created by novels. So Nemo appears in two of Verne's science fiction classics. Okay, so he's Captain Nemo. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Invisible Man, Orlando is a novel by Virginia Woolf, a high-spirited romp inspired by the tumultuous family history of Woolf's lover and close friend. It is arguably one of Woolf's most popular novels. Roland? Okay, so let's take a look at that. I don't know that character at all. Thomas Carnacki is a fictional occult detective created by William Hodges. Carnacki was the protagonist of a series of short published in 1910, 1912 in the Idler magazine and New magazine. All right, I'm not super familiar with that character. A.J. Raffles. Brother-in-law to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Raffle is, in many ways, a deliberate inversion of Holmes. He's a gentleman thief. This reminds me of something. I had been working on a series of stories. I could play with this a fair bit. Yes, I could. Emma Peel. Emma Knight. Fictional spy. I didn't know that character made an appearance. John Broad Arrow Jack. Okay, so Ishmael. Fictional Professor Augustus SFX von Dusen. Okay, yeah. So I don't know some of these characters. Oh, a Picture of Dorian Gray. That's the name of the story that it came from. So yeah, we could play with that. So let's pull up what we got here. So we want to do a Justice League in A steampunk Justice League. Okay, let's start that as a premise that we're playing with. Steampunk Justice League. Okay, and Dorian Gray. And we had Captain Nemo. And we had Mina the Vampiress. She's the one who fought Dorian Gray at a point in the movie because she's a vampire and he's his picture is what ages instead of him. So he's sort of cursed to not be affected by damage. Anything that happens to him happens to the painting instead, and he acts like nothing happened. So they're pretty much both immortal, except for I believe in the story of Dorian Gray, he lived a long, like almost immortal life. And the way that he was defeated was showing him his portrait. And immediately all the damage that happened to the portrait was transferred back to his main body and it killed him. I think in the movie, they destroyed the portrait and it killed him. Yeah. Now, the character of Dorian Gray does remind me of the Count de Saint-Germain, I think it is, who is supposedly an alchemist from ages past who figured out how to become immortal. I think they even reference it in the Harry Potter. He's the one who creates the Sorcerer's Stone that's used in the Harry Potter movie and book, potentially. I can't remember the book well enough. So I will tack that in there as a little piece of, like, I've got information in my brain that most people don't know anything about. It's one of those weird things, like nobody knows that name, but for some reason I do. Okay, so Dorian Gray, Captain Nemo. An equivalent for Captain Nemo would be, what is it, Daedalus? The Phoenician Greek who built the maze for the Minotaur, and he and Icarus were designers, and they created their wings, and they escaped. So let's put that in there, just in case. So that would be a good analog for Captain Nemo. Who would be your vampire equivalent? Oh, I'm tempted to say something like, what's her name? Lilith, Adam's first wife, before Eve. I should be clear that that's what I was talking about. Oh, well, there was... What was that baroness that used to bathe in the bloods of her maidens? Okay, so what we're looking at here is sort of like I'm bouncing on either side of good and evil. So are they on the same side? Is this a... Are we going to do enough evil people that it turns into, what is it? The recent DC movie with Harley Quinn and Will Smith, Deadshot. That was... Oh, God, I can't remember it. Where they play the bad guys that are given the chance to do good. It's a weird sort of story idea. Okay, so we also had, in the movie version, we had Tom Sawyer, who was not in the comics. And neither was Dorian Gray. Alan, what was his name? Sean Connery's character. It was Quartermain, Alan Quartermain. There you go. Quartermain. So we're looking at those at least. Like the big characters, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Okay, the equivalent of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for this story feels like you would do a Frankenstein's monster. Okay, and I don't have anything for Tom Sawyer or Alan Quartermain, but we'll get there. Who else did we have? Ah, God. Come on, internet, work for me here. So we had Captain Nemo, Hyde, the Invisible Man. Okay, so we pull that in there. Oh, hang on now. This makes me think of there was a bit of we're already past an hour. Oh well, we'll just keep playing. There was this idea that I had a while back. It's inspired sort of by mythology. The idea that you live in a world with heroes that are sort of like the classical heroes. So you have the children of Hercules or the children of Perseus. And so these are these legendary mythical heroes, and their descendants are the mythical descendants of those heroes, and therefore potentially heroes in their own right. And then they just all go missing. And something happens in the world where the world needs heroes. And maybe it's up to the children of the monsters to be the heroes. And so maybe we could dig into the distant history monsters, like the Frankenstein's monster, the vampire baroness, Count de Saint Germain. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Saint Germain, or whatever you want to call him. He could potentially be the one who assembles them. I don't feel like Daedalus fits with the rest of them because he is not villainous per se. And the idea of taking this as like, this wouldn't be necessarily the Baroness, the vampiric Baroness, but it could be one of her descendants and inherit some characteristic of her. And maybe have somebody who's a descendant of Frankenstein's monster. Or a reboot of Frankenstein's monster, a new version of that monster. Okay, so what else would we have? So we had the Invisible Man, and who else did we have in the movie? I think that was it, right? It was Captain Nemo, Dorian Gray, Mina, Tom Sawyer, Alan Quartermain, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, the Invisible Man. I think that was it, right? That was the whole cast, not counting the villains and all that went on. And you know, I'm still looking at the page for the comics. We had Orlando, and I didn't look that one up yet. Occult detective. An occult detective would be Quatermain and Tom Sawyer. The equivalent for them should be the Brothers Grimm. Come on, you got to do that, right? And who else would you do? And I mean, I'm not sure I'm with the idea of. I'm not sure I'm on the idea of the children of monsters being what we do here. But we could do the inheritors of historical people. So, yeah, who would you pick that up from? All right, so one of the other ones that came to my mind here is King Midas. I may end up just going in a whole direction that just focuses on some of the mythical characters, but here's the thing. It would be King Midas, the heir to King Midas in the time of steampunk. And it would be the heir to the Brothers Grimm in the time of steampunk. The heir to Frankenstein in steampunk. The heir to the Vampire Baroness. The heir to Daedalus. See, the Brothers Grimm were not evil. Neither was Daedalus. Do we have an invisible man from mythical history? The helmet of Perseus when he went and slayed Medusa. I believe he had the helmet of Hades. But I think some of that, the vampire hunter Van Helsing. He wasn't particularly evil unless you start to re-examine the possibility that his persecution of vampires could be interpreted as an evil thing. I don't know. It's a bit of a stretch, but all right. So let's go into the movie. See if we can find the movie. The film. So the League of Extraordinary Men. Okay. Cast. Alan Quatermain. Captain Nemo. Mina Harker. Rodney Skinner. I don't remember that character. Dorian Gray. Tom Sawyer. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Oh, they had the Phantom M. Professor James Moriarty as one of the characters. Who was Dante? I don't remember that one. Sanderson Reed, Nigel, Ishmael. They had Ishmael in there? I don't remember that at all. Anyway, so we mainly got that concept down. So if we were to play with this further, I have to really come to a decision at a certain point. I'm not sold on the idea of, Skinner was the Invisible Man. Then who was? Skinner was the Invisible Man. And then I don't know who Dante was. Played by Max Ryan, a British actor. It's not a clickable link, so it's not an important character, I don't think. Sanderson Reed and Nigel are not important characters either, apparently, because they're not a clickable link. Terry O'Neill played Ishmael. Skinner. So Dorian Gray, Tom Sawyer. Yeah, that's pretty much, I think that's what we had. So oh, okay. So let's pull up a bunch of, like, Wells and Verne were the inspiration for some of these science fiction stories. So let's see if we can find a bibliography for H.G. Wells here and see what other stories they've got. Literary representations, dramatic. No. Okay, so do we have a bibliography? Come on. Bibliography. H.G. Wells bibliography. The Time Machine. And that's different from M. Moriarty, maybe. Yeah. It's been so long since I've seen the movie, it's hard for me to remember it. So, The Time Machine, A Wonderful Visit, Island of Dr. Moreau. Ooh, I've been playing with that as a way to describe my gnomes in my Vestiges campaign. The Island of Dr. Moreau. Oh, I do want to play with that. Yes. And The Time Machine, maybe. The Invisible Man, War of the Worlds, The Martians. Oh, this could be so. I could play with that. Yeah, let's pull back out here for a second. So we've got Island of Dr. Moreau. Time Machine. War of the Worlds. When was that written? I feel like that. War of the Worlds was 1898. Okay, so The First Men in the Moon, The Sea Lady, Food of the Gods, A Modern Utopia, The Day of the Comet, War in the Air, wow, he's got a lot here. Dream, War. Okay, so I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing as much here that is well known and sort of as iconic. Dude, this guy's bibliography is huge. Yep, Morlocks. And that's what I'm sort of playing around with here, is like, I wonder, could we pull this into a story about the time machine being used to pass back and forth through history and grab characters from history, like the history of like science fiction and fantasy, to bring them to a certain time for a certain cause. Okay, so let's pull into Jules Verne now. I'm just opening tabs like crazy right now. So having access to the time machine is a potentially useful, also a potentially tricky little gimmick to play with. Okay, so Jules Verne, bibliography. Okay. 5 Weeks in a Balloon, The Adventures of Captain Herodotus, Journey to the Center of the Earth. I feel like that would be something worth playing with. From the Earth to the Moon, In Search of the Castaway, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Ooh, something to do with Atlantis. So, Journey to the Center of the Earth, bringing up Atlantis. Journey to the Center of the Earth, Atlantis, Utopia from Wells, and potentially Shangri-La. Who wrote that one? I don't know who wrote it. So we're about to find out, aren't we, though? Okay, so A Floating City. I don't know that one. Fur Country. Around the World in 80 Days. Mysterious Island. Oh, you know who else would be interesting to play with is H.P. Lovecraft. Okay, let's get there in a minute. The Mysterious Island. I need to look that one up. I don't think I've ever read that one. Okay, so we've got 800 Leagues on the Amazon, The Green Ray, Archipelago of Fire, Family Without a Name. I don't know some of these. I guess I haven't read as much of Jules Verne as I thought. Okay, Master of the World. Lighthouse at the End of the World does sound familiar. So let's do H.P. Lovecraft. Okay, H.P. Lovecraft. Bill and Ted's Adventure did something like that with gathering people. Oh, yeah, that is a Bill and Ted's thing, but it was historical figures, not superheroes from distant times. Yeah. There is, it's interesting that you call that out. Yeah. I don't think that was intentional on my part, but that's what happened, I guess. I'm not playing with Bill and Ted just yet. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I mean, honestly, Quantum Leap. Oh, could you do that, though? What if you didn't bring people back? What if... What if there was a cross-time emergency, like all throughout history, and you had to, you had the characters suddenly get contacted by somebody traveling through time, telling them what they had to do to set certain things in motion at the right time to defeat a cross-time crisis. Maybe something like that. But we're actually, at that point, you're moving too far outside of what we wanted, which was the steampunk time frame. So let's see if we can do a Lovecraft. See what we can find in Lovecraft. Where's his bibliography? H.P. Lovecraft bibliography. It's mostly just going to be like Cthulhu-themed stuff, I think. Yeah. So we would just use the Cthulian mythos as some of what's going on. This reminds me a little bit of Hellboy, where you have potentially somebody contacting elder monsters of forgotten ages past. It's really hard to reconcile a lot of these pieces. So I have to keep reminding myself to pull back out. Mad Max was I mean, it may have elements similar to diesel punk, but I would wager that Mad Max is more just post-apocalyptic. Depending on which one, the first one or the okay, so the subsequent ones in the series are a little different. So if we did steampunk, so we did a steampunk setting where it was superheroes, but instead of the Justice League, here we go. Okay, so steampunk, but instead of the Justice League, we did the X-Men? I can kind of see this working. All right, so what I'm thinking of is with like the island of Dr. Moreau, you have a mad scientist who's altering animals to be more like humans. So having one of those animals brought to a school or a center for people with unusual abilities to use their abilities to benefit the rest of humanity. Okay, so you could do Island of Dr. Moreau. So you would do humans and animals in human form. You could do Frankenstein's monster. Who else could you do in that theme? So what we have here is early science fiction has a tendency to include or create monsters. So let's pull back into taking a look at the creation of monsters in early science fiction. So early science fiction monsters. Let's just do a search for that if we can. Earliest sci-fi monsters. Not science fiction film. Let's try history of science fiction. Let's see what we got here first. They really like the films. I'm not asking about films right now. History of science fiction monsters. Okay, Dracula. Oh, God. All right, fine. If you're not going to let me check out the website, then I'm going to go somewhere else. If you're going to continue to be that way about it. I don't want films. I want science fiction literature. I really am frustrated by Google these days. It never gives me the results I need. Famous monsters of history. Maybe. So let's take a look at what they got here. If it's a nope, that's a book on Amazon. I'm not ordering a book and waiting 2 days minimum for it to arrive. Okay, Okay, so what do we got here? Monsters of literature. What do we got? What do we got? Frankenstein, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We could probably do that one too. I'm trying to step away from ones that were already used. But Jekyll and Hyde, we'll put that in there. So Jekyll and Hyde, Frankenstein, Island of Dr. Moreau. So inhuman creatures. And I think that probably is something we'll end up using in the title. Wow, I don't want to run 2 hours tonight. We're already at an hour and a half. I Am Legend was in 1954. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Monsters in literature. 31 fairly obscure literary monsters. Let's see what we got. Oh. Did they refer to the Sandman? Yes, they did. I actually have a piece of fiction that I was working on before about that. Gil Martin from the Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. Convinced that he murders in God's name, Ringham theorizes his would-be congregation only to slip deeper into Gilmartin's madness. Unlike most monsters, more likely to eat your heart than to discuss correct interpretation of the scripture. That's not a Man of the Crowd from the Man of the Crowd by Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, so if you live in a metropolis, so this sounds like a character who is, what if some of the people you pass on your commute had no existence separate from their abeyance to the city's inscrutable rhythm? That sounds interesting. Okay. Okay, so who is Beatrice Rappaccini? Rappaccini's daughter. Okay, Silas, Rythan, Loki. No. What the? Like, how is it like perpetually that like none of these are monsters? These are just horrible people. The damn thing from that damn thing. The great god Pan, Morlocks from the Time Machine, Count Magnus, Alron from Alron. Okay, that doesn't tell me anything. Thak the Man Ape, Newt from War with the Newts. Like, yeah, these are obscure for a reason. Like, they're not useful in anything. I mean, Swamp Thing is at least an option here. I mean, we never used, they never used the Wolfman or anything like that. But it feels like a lot of that's a lot less, like steampunk tends to favor science fantasy, not magic fantasy. Oh, come on. Yeah, none of that was useful. That's a terrible site. I don't know what you're trying to play at there, but okay. Greatest literary monsters. What do you got? Okay, we've got Frankenstein's monster. Yes, we're there. Count Dracula. Werewolves. Mr. Hyde. Grendel. The Hound of the Baskervilles. Giant squid. Zombies. Could do that. Ghosts. The Jabberwocky. Zombies. We could do a zombie, I think. We could probably throw a zombie in there. Zombie. So this would be a... I imagine this would be less of a school and more of an asylum. This would be like an asylum where you take the non-human. Oh, I don't know. I have to think about that a little bit. Kraken, Apollyon, the Gruffalo, Shoggoth, It. No, God. Like, wow, it turns out it's not as easy to track down some of these early science fiction monsters. And since we're approaching 1 hour and 40 minutes, I'm going to get ready to call it here. I will be back tomorrow, I guess, to play with this a little bit more. So I don't usually like to run a marathon goof session, but I do have a little bit of fun with this. So I will say for now, take care, have a good night, and I will catch you tomorrow. I will work on this in the meantime, so it's not as a lot of dead air as I brainstorm, but we'll play with it a little tomorrow. Night. Okay, I gotta figure out here. 20 literary. There better be 20 useful monsters in there.